What makes a murderer? Is it something buried deep within them, waiting for the right moment to surface? Or is it something that grows over time, shaped by experience and circumstance? Now, imagine a small, quiet town, one where families feel safe, where children walk freely, and where crime is something that happens elsewhere. But on October 22, 2013, that illusion of safety shattered. A crime so brutal, so senseless, and so incomprehensible unfolded inside the walls of Danvers High School. A crime committed by someone no one would have ever suspected, a 14-year-old boy. That boy was Philip Chisholm, a freshman, a student like any other, blending into the crowd, unnoticed. But behind that quiet exterior lurked something far darker than anyone could have imagined. What drove him to do what he did that day remains one of the most haunting questions in modern criminal history. Welcome to That Police Officer, where we take you inside the most gripping true crime cases. Here, we don't just tell the story. We break it down, piece by piece, analyzing the investigation, the evidence, and the justice that follows. Every case we cover is real. Every detail is factual. And every story reminds us why the pursuit of justice never stops. Today's investigation takes us to Danvers, Massachusetts, a quiet town forever changed by an unimaginable act of violence. At the center of this tragic story was Colleen Ritzer, 24 years old, young, bright, full of life. Teaching wasn't just her job, it was her passion. She had a way of making numbers make sense, turning difficult equations into something exciting for her students. She wasn't just their teacher, she was their mentor, their supporter, their inspiration. Her classroom was a place of encouragement, where no one was left behind. At just 24 years old, Colleen was living her dream. She had worked hard to get there, earning her degree from Assumption College before returning to her home state of Massachusetts to begin her career. She wasn't just good at her job, she loved it. Her students saw it in the way she taught, in the way she encouraged them when they struggled, and in the way she made even the most complicated equations seem simple. She was known for her kindness, her patience, and her genuine passion for teaching. She made learning feel less like a requirement and more like an opportunity. But beyond the classroom, Colleen Ritzer was more than just a teacher. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She had a bright future ahead of her, with dreams of continuing her education and one day becoming a college professor. She was the kind of person who left a mark, not just on her students, but on everyone who knew her. That's what made what happened so difficult to comprehend. But that classroom, her sanctuary, became the setting for her final moments. On what should have been an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Colleen Ritzer stayed late, as she often did, to help her students. She had no way of knowing that one of them had something else in mind, that as she went about her day, preparing for tomorrow's lessons, she was being watched, followed, stalked. There's a disturbing truth about evil. It often hides in plain sight. It walks among us, undetected, masked behind familiar faces and everyday routines. And that's what makes this case so disturbing. Because Philip Chisholm wasn't a hardened criminal. He wasn't someone with a history of violence. He was just a boy who, for reasons that may never be fully understood, carried out an act of pure horror. The details of what happened next would send shockwaves through the town of Danvers, through the entire country, because what unfolded inside the walls of that high school defied explanation. It wasn't just a crime, it was an execution. Methodical, merciless, unforgivable. And yet, even after all these years, one question remains. Why? What snapped inside Philip Chisholm's mind that day? What was it about that particular afternoon, that particular moment, that turned him from an ordinary student into a cold-blooded killer? Was it something premeditated? Or did something inside him break without warning? The answers remain elusive. But one thing is certain, Colleen Ritzer never saw it coming. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, it was already too late. Philip Chisholm was new to Danvers High School. He had recently moved to Massachusetts from Clarksville, Tennessee, and was adjusting to life in a new town, a new school, a new environment. By all accounts, he was quiet, reserved. He kept to himself, rarely drawing attention. To his teachers, he was just another student. To his classmates, he was just another face in the crowd. There was nothing about him that stood out. No signs, no warnings, no reason to suspect that, beneath his silent demeanor, something dangerous was brewing. No one knew the darkness that lay beneath the surface. No one could have imagined what he was capable of. Danvers had never seen a crime like this before. It wasn't just the brutality of the act itself, it was who committed it. A 14-year-old, a child, someone who should have been worrying about homework, about sports, about fitting in at a new school, not about murder. It was unthinkable. The small town that once prided itself on its safety was now at the center of national attention. The streets where children once played without fear now carried the weight of tragedy. The halls of Danvers High, once filled with the everyday sounds of teenage life, would forever be haunted by what happened there. For the students who knew Colleen Ritzer, for the teachers who worked alongside her, and for the family that loved her, life would never be the same. And as the town struggled to make sense of it all, one question remained. How did no one see this coming? Because on the surface, Philip Chisholm was just another student. But what he did next would prove that he was something else entirely. It was a typical Tuesday at Danvers High School. Students moved between classrooms as the halls filled with the sounds of conversation, lectures, and daily routines. There was no indication that, by the end of the day, the school would become the site of a shocking and tragic crime. For Colleen Ritzer, the day was like any other. She had a full schedule of math classes, each one filled with students who relied on her guidance. She stayed after school, as she often did, to offer extra help. It was something she never hesitated to do, going above and beyond to make sure her students succeeded. Among those who remained behind was 14-year-old Philip Chisholm. He sat quietly, blending into the classroom, barely speaking. If there was anything troubling him that day, it wasn't apparent. There were no outbursts, no signs of anger, nothing that could have predicted what was about to unfold. But what no one knew was that Philip Chisholm had come to school that day with something sinister on his mind. At some point that afternoon, Colleen Ritzer left the classroom and walked down the hall toward the faculty restroom. The hallway was empty, except for one other person, Chisholm. Surveillance cameras captured the moment he rose from his seat, pulled his hood over his head, and walked out of the classroom. He moved with quiet intent, his hands slipping into a pair of gloves as he followed her. The door to the restroom swung shut behind them. No one saw what happened next, but the forensic evidence and the brutal aftermath would later paint a horrific picture. Inside that small, windowless bathroom, Philip Chisholm attacked. The force of his assault was overwhelming. He strangled her, overpowering her completely before pulling out a box cutter. The blade slashed through her skin again and again, 16 times. Her blood coated the floor, the walls, her clothes. But the attack didn't stop there. Even as she lay dying, he continued. The crime was more than just an act of violence. It was one of domination, control, and unimaginable cruelty. When it was over, Philip Chisholm didn't panic. He didn't run. Instead, he carefully cleaned up, making calculated decisions as if he had planned every move in advance. He retrieved a large, wheeled recycling bin from the hallway and dragged it into the bathroom. Then, he lifted her body inside. Surveillance cameras captured what came next. Chisholm pushed the bin out of the bathroom and into the hallway. The school was mostly empty by then, but if anyone had seen him, they might have assumed he was simply taking out the trash. He moved with a level of composure, rolling the bin through the halls, out the side door, and into the growing darkness outside. Once he reached the woods behind the school, he tipped the bin over, letting her body spill onto the ground. But even here, his cruelty wasn't finished. The evidence later revealed that, despite the horror she had already endured, Colleen Ritzer suffered further unspeakable violence in those woods. The brutality of the attack escalated. A tree branch, more injuries, more evidence of a disturbed mind that showed no hesitation, no remorse. And then, as if none of it mattered, Philip Chisholm walked away. He didn't try to hide. He didn't attempt to flee far. Hours later, he was found walking along the side of a highway in a neighboring town, carrying the bloodied box cutter, a mask, and Colleen Ritzer's credit cards. When police took him into custody, he had no visible emotion, no fear, no regret. By then, Colleen Ritzer's body lay abandoned in the woods, partially covered by leaves and debris, a final, desperate attempt to conceal what he had done. But the truth wouldn't stay buried. And soon, The entire town of Danvers would learn the horrifying reality of what had taken place inside their school. The question now wasn't just what had happened. It was why. If you're finding this story compelling, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you in-depth true crime investigations. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Colleen Ritzer's absence began to raise concern. It wasn't like her to be late, let alone to disappear without a word. Her family waited, expecting a call or a text that never came. The minutes stretched into hours, and unease turned to fear. Something was wrong. By nightfall, a missing person report was filed. Authorities were contacted, and an urgent search began. Danvers High School, the place where she was last seen, became the focal point of the investigation. The campus, usually a place of learning and routine, was now the center of something far more sinister. Officers combed through the empty hallways, checking every room, every corridor. Then, inside a faculty bathroom, they found the first sign that something terrible had happened. Blood, streaked across the walls, pooled on the floor. The kind of scene that made seasoned investigators stop in their tracks. This was no accident. This was a crime. And then came the most disturbing discovery yet. Colleen Ritzer was nowhere to be found. Outside, police widened their search. They scanned security footage, desperate for answers. What they found was beyond comprehension. The grainy images showed a lone figure pushing a large recycling bin through the hallways, out the door, and toward the woods. A closer look revealed the unthinkable. Inside that bin was Colleen Ritzer. But what made it even more shocking was who was pushing it. A 14-year-old boy, Philip Chisholm. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Could it be possible? A freshman student committing such an act, inside the very school where teachers were meant to shape young minds? The footage left no doubt. But one question remained. Where was he now? The manhunt was swift. Within hours, officers spotted him miles away, walking along the side of a highway. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was simply walking, as if nothing had happened. When they approached, they noticed what he was carrying, a box cutter. Its blade was still stained with blood, a mask, and then, one final, chilling detail, Colleen Ritzer's credit cards. The question now became, what set him off? Investigators discovered that just before the attack, Colleen Ritzer had tried to engage Chisholm in conversation. A simple attempt at kindness, at connection. She had asked him about Tennessee, his old home. It was small talk, something most people wouldn't even remember an hour later. But for reasons that remain unclear, that question triggered something dark inside him. Another student in the classroom noticed a change in his demeanor. His expression hardened. His body language shifted. He grew silent, tense. It was as if something inside him had snapped. Did he feel exposed? Mocked? Enraged? No one can say for sure. But what followed was something far beyond an emotional reaction. The sheer brutality of the attack raised unsettling questions. This wasn't just a murder. It was an act of domination, of complete and total destruction. A crime of this magnitude, carried out with such deliberate force, didn't seem like the result of a single moment of anger. It was something deeper. The prosecution argued that his actions proved intent. He didn't simply lash out. He took calculated steps, both before and after the attack, to ensure that he could carry out his crime. He waited until the hallway was empty. He put on gloves. He concealed his weapon until the moment he struck. Then, after it was over, he cleaned himself up, discarded evidence, and walked away as if nothing had happened. If this was insanity, why did he take such careful measures to cover his tracks? If he was truly out of his mind, why did he show such composure in the aftermath? These were the questions that would soon be at the heart of his trial. Was Philip Chisholm a boy suffering from a severe mental break? Or was he something far more terrifying? A cold, calculating predator who knew exactly what he was doing? The courtroom would soon decide. The weight of Philip Chisholm's crime demanded the full force of the law. Despite his age, there was no question. This was not a case for juvenile court. The brutality, the evidence of premeditation, and the shocking nature of the attack left prosecutors with only one path forward. Chisholm would be tried as an adult. He faced multiple charges, each one more severe than the last. First-degree murder, aggravated rape, armed robbery. Convictions on these counts would mean decades behind bars, if not life. The legal battle ahead would be intense, drawing national attention and igniting fierce debate about justice, rehabilitation, and the capacity for evil within a child. The courtroom was packed when the trial began. On one side sat Colleen Ritzer's grieving family, forced to relive the horror of what had been done to their daughter. On the other, the defense team, tasked with arguing that the boy responsible for her death was not fully in control of his actions. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out the facts. They walked the jury through the timeline of events, presenting surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and eyewitness accounts. Every step Philip Chisholm had taken that day was deliberate. From the moment he retrieved the box cutter, to the calculated way he followed Ritzer, to the aftermath, where he took steps to clean up and dispose of evidence. Every action pointed to premeditation. They played the security footage frame by frame. The jury watched as Chisholm adjusted his hood, pulled on gloves, and entered the faculty bathroom. They saw the recycling bin being rolled out of the school, its horrific contents hidden inside. These were not the actions of someone in the midst of a psychotic break, they argued. This was the work of a predator. The defense countered with a different narrative. They called upon psychiatric experts, presenting testimony that painted Chisholm as a deeply disturbed boy suffering from mental illness. His lawyers argued that he had been experiencing severe psychosis, that he was hearing voices, that he was incapable of rational thought when he attacked Ritzer. They pointed to a family history of psychiatric disorders, claiming that his actions stemmed from something beyond his control. But the prosecution was prepared. They dismantled the argument piece by piece, pointing out that Chisholm had demonstrated awareness of right and wrong. He had made conscious decisions to hide his weapon, change his clothes, and walk away from the crime scene as if nothing had happened. He had been in control. He had known exactly what he was doing. After weeks of testimony, the case was handed to the jury. Their task was a heavy one: to determine whether Philip Chisholm was a deeply troubled boy lost in the depths of mental illness, or a cold-blooded killer who deserved no mercy. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. First-degree murder. Aggravated rape. Armed robbery. Philip Chisholm showed no reaction as the words were read. But across the courtroom, the air was thick with emotion. Colleen Ritzer's parents clutched each other, tears streaming down their faces. Their daughter's killer had been convicted, but there was no relief. No victory. Nothing could bring her back. During sentencing, the judge delivered a punishment as severe as the law would allow. A minimum of 40 years in prison before the possibility of parole. For Colleen's family, it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. They called him pure evil, a monster incapable of remorse or rehabilitation. To them, his fate should have been sealed forever. But the debate wasn't over. Years later, in 2024, Philip Chisholm's case was back in the headlines. His legal team challenged his sentence, arguing that even the most violent juveniles deserved a second chance. They pointed to rulings from the U.S. Supreme Court, which declared mandatory life sentences for minors unconstitutional. The argument was clear. Could someone who committed such an atrocity at 14 ever be truly beyond redemption? For Colleen Ritzer's family, the answer was obvious. The wounds he inflicted had never healed. They would never get a second chance with their daughter. Why should he? The court's decision would determine not just Chisholm's fate, but set a precedent for juvenile offenders across the country. Would he ever walk free again? Or would justice keep him behind bars, where he could never harm another innocent victim? The battle wasn't over. And for those left to pick up the pieces, it never would be. The murder of Colleen Ritzer did more than devastate a family. It sent shockwaves through an entire community. Danvers, once seen as a quiet and safe town, became the backdrop for one of the most chilling crimes in recent history. Parents struggled with how to explain to their children that their beloved teacher was gone, taken in an act of incomprehensible violence. Teachers, who dedicate their lives to educating and nurturing students, were forced to confront a terrifying reality that even within the walls of a school, they were not always safe. For Colleen's family, justice brought no relief. Her parents have spoken openly about their endless grief, the hollow space left in their lives, the pain of knowing that no sentence, no punishment, could ever bring her back. They have fought tirelessly to ensure her memory is not defined by the horror of her death, but by the kindness she showed in life. This case also reignited a nationwide debate about juvenile crime. Should minors who commit such heinous acts be eligible for parole? Can a child who takes a life in such a brutal manner ever be rehabilitated? Or are some crimes so monstrous that age should not be a factor? That question became even more pressing when, after his conviction, Philip Chisholm committed another violent attack, this time on a clinician inside a correctional facility. The eerie similarities to his first crime raised unsettling concerns. Was this proof that he was beyond redemption? That no amount of time, therapy, or rehabilitation could undo what he had become? The case of Philip Chisholm forces society to confront difficult truths about juvenile offenders, mental illness, and the limits of justice. But beyond the legal battles and debates, there remains one undeniable fact. Colleen Ritzer deserved better. She deserved to live. Colleen Ritzer's story should not be remembered for the way it ended, but for the way she lived. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and an educator who believed in the power of kindness and learning. She dedicated her life to teaching, to making math less intimidating, to encouraging students to believe in themselves. That is the legacy she leaves behind. Her family continues to honor her memory through the Colleen E. Ritzer Memorial Fund, which promotes kindness and supports students pursuing careers in education. It is a testament to the impact she had and the lives she touched. She was more than a victim. She was a force for good in the world. This case also raises an urgent question about the safety of teachers. Schools are meant to be places of learning, not violence. How can we better protect educators from harm? What policies need to change to ensure that no teacher has to fear for their life while doing the job they love? And then, there is the larger debate. Should juveniles who commit crimes this severe ever be given a second chance? Should age be a factor in determining justice? Or should the sheer brutality of a crime override everything else? What do you think? Justice, rehabilitation, or something in between? Let us know in the comments. And most importantly, let's remember Colleen Ritzer for who she truly was. Not for the way her life ended, but for the kindness she left behind.